This tiny India ink landscape is a study of atmospheric perspective. First, I'm going to tape my watercolor paper using artist tape, and I'm going to put it on my sleeve so that it is not as sticky. So when I peel the tape when the painting is finished, it doesn't rip and tear my paper. I'm placing this on top of my Canson XL watercolor paper. You can also use Bristol with India ink, and this just makes a really nice white crisp border. Then I'm going to use this value scale that I created, a palette, several different paintbrushes, and water to create my India ink landscape. I'm going to start by adding scoops of water with my paintbrush and then a tiny dip of India ink to make my light gray. If you've never practiced making a value scale before, I do recommend doing that first. There is a video above if you click the link. Then you're going to mix your lightest value. So the lightest gray, I call this dirty paint water gray, and you're going to paint your horizon line. This is where your lightest values are. These are the areas that have the least detail and the smallest shape. So even though this is a huge, gigantic mountain, it's really far away, so it's lighter, it's smaller, and it's less detailed. With a slightly darker light gray, I'm going to go over and smooth things out, and then I'm going to layer from my horizon line here. So your horizon line can be mountains, it can be a plain. I'm going to do just kind of like a simple mountain landscape. I'm going to add a tiny little bit more ink to that one section that I've been mixing. I'm going to test it out to make sure it is slightly darker. There we go. And then I'm going to overlap a second round of mountains. So this is still part of my background. Technically, the horizon line is where the sky meets the land. And the background also has really light values because it's super far away. And because we're doing a mountain landscape, I'm trying to push the atmospheric perspective. That is the illusion of depth in art, where the elements that are farther away are smaller, lighter in value, and less detailed. As we're moving forward, I'm just making sure that there's a little bit of overlap, making sure that my shapes are the way I want them to be. And I do recommend looking at images. It'd be great if you were like sitting in a cabin looking out the window, but that's not most of our real life. So I'm looking at some images of mountains online that I think are really pretty. Moving forward, you can see that my gray and my overlapping mountains are getting a little bit darker, a little bit larger as I get towards my middle ground. So I'm going to mix a little bit more here just so I can touch up the shape. And a good rule of thumb is to always extend down a little bit lower than you think you need to. So if you're going to be overlapping kind of organic shapes, you don't have any awkward, weird gaps. The ink does dry a little bit lighter, so keep that in mind as you're painting. Adding a little bit more ink here, I'm going to now focus on my medium to medium dark gray. And this is where I'm going to really focus on my middle ground. The middle ground is the part of the landscape that's, as it sounds, in the middle. These have your medium or middle values. You have slightly more detail. And if you were adding trees or any other details, things are going to be getting larger. So for this landscape, I'm inspired by Colorado, Tennessee, Arizona, just like stacks and layers of mountains. So I'm not going to do like a river or a plain or anything like that. It's all about mountains. And if this is your first landscape, that is a more simple way to think about things because the shapes are very simple. Now we're getting to the foreground. And the foreground is where you have your darkest values. So your dark, medium, dark, and black grays, and that is going to go all the way down to the front or bottom of your paper. The foreground is closer to the viewer, so everything here is going to be larger, everything is going to be darker, and everything is going to have more detail. And we're doing this in grayscale, so luckily we don't have to worry about color, so we're just going to keep things very simple and just focus on the darkest, largest shapes being in the front. The foreground is if you were in this painting, so if you were like standing here, that is where you would be standing. So things are going to be very close. You can really play around with depth and size by making your trees or whatever subject matter really large, and that makes the foreground appear closer. I'm going to use a really dark gray and then add black on top of that, going all the way down to the edge of my painting. So let's do a little bit of dark gray just to fill in these shapes. And then I always like to put jet black in my foreground because India ink has just the most beautiful, opaque, rich black. So I'm going to dip straight in my India ink for the first time to make sure that there's a nice organic edge of black down at the bottom of my landscape. From here, I'm going to let things dry. And then I'm going to think about adding some trees. So a good rule of thumb is always start lighter than you think you need to. So I have practiced trees before. If you're interested in how to paint a tree step by step, you can click the link above and I have a step-by-step tutorial for that. And I'm just doing kind of a simple evergreen. It is kind of a silhouette, but I'm not starting with black. So I'm starting with more of a medium gray, and that gives me a little wiggle room because you can't erase ink. So if I do it with a lighter gray than it's going to end up being, that just gives me a little room to make a mistake or change things if I'm unhappy. Also, you don't want your tree to just be solid black. There's nothing wrong with a silhouette, but having a little bit of black, dark gray, maybe even medium gray peeking through gives your artwork a little bit more depth and dimension. And I really love this because when you peel the tape, it has this look of a Polaroid. It's such a simple approach. You're really only focusing on value and shape, and you can create a dynamic artwork that is just simple, but also really breathtaking, exploring a concept of atmospheric perspective in a really simple way. If you've never done landscapes before, they can be really tricky when you're adding colors, so making things black and white is always a great place to learn. I stuck to the rule of threes with my trees, and I made sure they were not perfectly the same. They're cousins, not twins. And now I'm peeling my tape at a 90-degree angle so it doesn't peel or doesn't rip my watercolor paper. And there she is, my finished India ink landscape, focusing on atmospheric perspective. If you love learning about art, check out these other tutorials and find my website, thatartteacher.com, for all of my free full-length lesson plans, student examples, and rubrics, all things art education.